Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Milken Summit. This is a special place. You're here for the right reason, for the right thing, because today we're looking at artificial intelligence and human intelligence and how the two really meet to make for a better world and a better future. So where are people and machines headed for? In concert or in conflict? This is the question. And also, how can it aid and enhance your investment decisions and how you make good bets and good knowledge for the work that you do in really maximizing the positions you have in investment? We've got a fantastic group of real experts here to take you through where this is. And first of all, we'd like to introduce on your left Dr. Mike Lynch. Mike is a jazz saxophone player, in case you didn't recognize that here on the stage. Mike, Mike, wonderful to have you here. Mike founded a company called Invoke Capital, but has had a really distinguished history of being involved in developing many businesses, immensely successful, Autonomy, one in particular, that he sold for $11 billion to HP. And Mike has been involved in many very groundbreaking developments in technology, artificial intelligence, including the first recognition of fingerprints and also the first sampling of music many, many years ago that then led to a complete change in that industry. So Mike, welcome, come in from Cambridge, and it's really terrific to see you here. Give Mike a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Sitting next to Mike, we have Dominic, who's the European head of investment banking and the joint global head of technology at Jefferies, very important international finance company. A long history in advising companies on mergers and acquisitions, $250 billion worth in his career. He speaks Spanish, French, German, Italian. He's not briefing Downing Street this morning on Brexit because he's here with us. So you can see the importance. This is a much more important place than number 10 Downing Street. So welcome, give him a nice round of applause. Pleased to have Mike DeAddio. Mike is with WorldQuant, very interesting, important company that is very closely involved with Milken. And he oversees technology and finance at WorldQuant, and has also got a distinguished track record, originally qualified as an electrical engineer at MIT, specializing in data analytics and prediction, and how one speeds up predictive patterns to assist in investment analysis. Would you say that that's an accurate assessment? Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, Mike DeAddio. Give him a round of applause. We should have introduced Pippa to begin with, obviously to give ladies a preference. But Pippa Malmgren, Dr. Pippa Malmgren, is the founder of the DRPM Group and also the co-founder of H Robotics. Very, very distinguished in the top 20 of the most influential economists in the world, according to Richtopia, and also in the top 5 most powerful women in finance in 2017. So all of you men in the audience, watch out. Please give Pippa a big warm welcome. Just to mention, Pippa wrote a very big book called Signals in 2016, a best-selling book, basically about what the future was going to bring, which drew the largest ever advance for a foreign language book in China. Is that correct, Pippa?
It was a good one.
It was a good
one.
Very good. Well, that's Pippa, and Pippa will be introducing some interesting stuff to us. And last but by no means least, all the way from Malibu, California, somebody who specializes in human performance and a way in which you evaluate whether humans can actually meet machines or machines can meet humans. Please welcome Andy Walsh.
Thank you, Doc.
Andy. So, ladies and gentlemen, we thought to kick off, we'll show you an interesting interaction between humans and machines. We've got an interesting clip that was taken just a few days ago of a groundbreaking event that happened, partly influenced in part by Andy Walsh, who's on this panel. So can we go to the video and let's see what we can see in the Alps of Switzerland. In the flying suits, there they are, going down. And the goal is to try and get these 2 flying suits and men into that aircraft. Now, This is not easy, as you can imagine. The pilots have to judge it very carefully. The flyers have to judge it carefully. They've rehearsed this dozens of times, sometimes with accidents, sometimes working effectively. And if you just think of the calculus that is needed to be able to do this, contact with the plane, quite a formidable environment. We want to show this because this is really a very interesting ballet between machine and human. Oh my God. Oh!
Okay, we've got one ready for the second one.
Just think of how you've got to pilot that plane to make sure that you are directly in concert with the flyer. Boom! There we are. That's great. Now, what do you think of that? So, if you see that, the reason I showed you that was because you really do need to have strong human interface with machines. And Mike, we thought we'd start off with yourself because really basically in an age where we're looking at Bitcoin now at $11,000, where predictive analytics are so important, you've been developing some really interesting software and predictive technologies, particularly with your company Darktrace. Just tell us a little bit about that.
So Darktrace is a company which is in cyber defense, but based on machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the idea is that you can't know what the attack is going to look like beforehand now. It's possible for people who want to attack you to get completely novel, original things. And you can't actually stop them getting in. People that work in this field know that if someone really wants to get in, they can. So the issue is, can you get something which has the intelligence to watch what's going on across the whole of a company and spot when something's up to something it shouldn't be doing and then deal with it? And actually, we're now seeing the attackers use artificial intelligence as well. So for the first time, actually, a few months ago, we saw the first real hot war between two artificial intelligences. And that's only made possible because the human couldn't possibly do this. They couldn't work fast enough or across enough areas. So that's an example of an area where you have to have these kind of technologies to do it. Other areas are where you're supplementing the work of a human, and that's a different application area. So we have a business there, for example, called Luminance, which is about helping lawyers. So it will do things like in an M&A deal, read all of the contracts and actually point them to the ones that might have a problem.
Machine reading of the contracts in an M&A analysis to be able to determine what might be dangerous.
So, for example, what might be bribery? Which contract might have a bribery issue you need to check out as part of your deal.
Right.
So the machine needs to be able to read it, understand those sort of concepts, and then say, rather than the 2 million, why don't you look at these first 100 first, because those are probably the ones where we're going to start having issues, or we might want to change the negotiation or something like that. And so that's going to lead the way, for example, to automated contract negotiation and things like that. And these are systems that are live now. Major law firms are using them. The Darktrace business has 300 million in bookings, and that's only 3 years old. So, the potential for these technologies where there's a problem which suits them to suddenly change a market is very, very strong. Other areas we're seeing it in medicine. So, for example, cancer treatment around understanding the genetics of a tumor. It suits very well to machine learning technologies. And then we've got lots of the other applications that are going on. But one important thing is that people who haven't worked in the area for many years get confused between two things. There's what's called narrow AI, which is where you have a very specific problem that you can define. And then there's broad AI. And broad AI is what we do in our lives. We walk around and make sure we don't get run over by buses and all sorts of things. And what you must not make the mistake of is extrapolating from the incredible advances in narrow AI at the moment into broad AI. And so what you find is there are some jobs where the skill set is really about broad AI. It's about taking what the world throws at you. And those will not be affected unless there are significant new breakthroughs rather than a continuum of what's going on. So it's a slightly more complex area than people think in terms of how these things get split up.
But Mike, you've really specialized in this whole notion of pattern recognition, and one of the things that you were successful at doing was identifying a huge virus that affected the national health system here in the UK a few months ago called WannaCry. Just tell us a little bit about how you basically got to terms with and controlled that really destructive virus that infiltrated the British
Well,
computer systems.
that was the artificial intelligence, so it's sitting there, and we happen to have a large number of corporates that were attacked by that. And the important thing is that the machine didn't have to have seen that before, even though it was new. And then the second thing was it moved too fast for a human defender to deal with. And so what the machine had to do was, first of all, spot that this thing is starting to do things that make it look like it's got malevolent intent. But then it moved up to the next level and it becomes offensive. And so what it does is, first of all, start to isolate the thing by shutting it into rooms inside the company, if you like, and then goes and kills it. And so, you know, that's an area where we're starting to see something which will be a precursor of things in the future, where not only do AIs actually spot what's going on and understand it, but actually then form strategies to, for example, in those kind of situations, actually actively defend rather than just warning you about things.
So we really are living in an era where your systems internally are under threat a lot of the time. People talk about the Russian troll machines in Moscow or around the world that are infiltrating. And that brings us to a good point, Pippa, with yourself, if we may. You spent some time working in the White House as an advisor after 9/11. You did special work on investigating Enron and also investigating terrorism risks to the economy, and looking at a whole range of ways in which you could use intelligence and artificial intelligence to really monitor real-life situations that were really significant. And I was taken by the fact that you feel one of the things you like to do before breakfast every day is to imagine 10 impossible things. This is part of your Imaginarium. You like to prepare for the impossible because you say preparing for the impossible is half the battle. So you also work with Chatham House, but give us some kind of idea now with DRPM and your drone company, because with H Robotics, what made you get into that and how does that relate to artificial intelligence?
Right. So I brought the drone that my firm makes. It really is a tool for having sight. This is the key thing. Now, here's the artificial intelligence connection. This thing self-corrects midair 400 times per second.
Wow.
Why does this matter? It matters because it gives you stability of your view. Now, I'm going to help you guys not ask the question, how much does the drone carry? Everyone asks this ever since Amazon introduced the business of delivery. I think delivery is the least likely use of drones.
Right.
So, but what it does do is it helps you manage the toxic runoff at a mining site. What it does do is it takes a dam inspector. For example, the state of California, they have 2,500 dams. They have 30 dam inspectors, and they can't afford to hire any more. This augments the capacity of the dam inspector because this can identify when a crack is on the move and through AI basically sends you a text message. So you know which of the dams is the one that needs your attention. This is for doing detection and deterrence on pipelines, oil and gas pipelines, so that big companies right now can only get within about 5 kilometers of where they've had sabotage, theft, a leak. So you get a huge environmental damage. Anyway, the key point is this physical platform can only deliver this kind of data and information because of artificial intelligence. And I personally think one of the most important issues here, everyone says AI is going to replace all our jobs. I deeply disagree, and I think this is a perfect example of a complete lack of imagination. Because if it was true that automation was going to destroy all of our jobs, we've had automation for more than 100 years. And what do we see today? Record low unemployment, more people lifted out of poverty than any time in history. So the key thing is, if you use your imagination, you begin to understand how the technology will actually create new jobs. And I'll tell you the one new job, and I think every major company is going to have. It's a job title nobody thinks of, but NASA has this job. It's chief storyteller. And the reason you need it is because artificial intelligence is so complex and it's going to be so pervasive. We're going to have a real problem if the scientists won't explain it in plain English or can't, which mainly they can't, and if the public won't or can't do the work to understand the science. And I put up on Twitter this morning for you under Dr. Pippa M. I would have put Pippa M, but you get pictures of the future Queen's sister. Anyway, so Dr. Pippa M. I put up C.P. Snow's famous 1959 Reed lecture called The Two Cultures, where he says our biggest problem is that the people who can explain the second law of thermodynamics can't explain it in English, and the people who can quote Shakespeare don't understand the second law of thermodynamics. Our society is split, and this is the thing that will hold us back more than anything, because the technology is perfectly capable. Our lack of imagination as to how to deploy it, how to not be fearful of it, that's the issue.
So effectively what you're saying is that the human side of all of this is completely irreducible. You cannot have AI without human analytical intelligence, obviously. And there's a big debate at the moment as to whether you need less of it or more of it, but the point is it's absolutely fundamental to the growth of investments in AI and the growth in the investment business that AI is mobilized and monitored by strong human interaction.
Well, I think I follow along your great point. We also have high AI and low AI.
Right.
And so high AI is self-learning neural networks, self-replicating learning neural networks, which is a pretty small part of what exists in the world today. Low AI is it just executes tasks. It's just grunt. And on that front, yeah, we're going to get a lot more grunt. So President Putin recently said, whoever wins at artificial intelligence will win in geopolitics. And this is an announcement about the new space race. The new space race is in the realm of not just AI, but quantum computing.
Right.
So the Chinese have just announced they're spending $100 billion on a 4 million square foot facility that, when completed, will be a quantum computing facility that will provide 1 million times all the existing computational capability on the planet today. Now, that is going to power AI into doing all kinds of extraordinary things, from curing cancer to creating a world in which, frankly, you will be so susceptible to advertising you won't even be able to say no to things. So it's good and it's bad. It's both. But we definitely need to prepare. This is a radical change in our world.
So from a political point of view, if you're sitting in the Situation Room at the White House or in the Pentagon, or even here at GCHQ or Downing Street, you've got to be aware of the bad actors, the bad players, of which there are many, because you get the dark net and whatever that breeds.
Yeah.
And more particularly, whilst you have to have that diligence, this is also a time for great exploration and development of technology that services and serves the human condition.
Well, here's the bottom line. It's just like cars. Cars can kill people or they can transport them safely to a destination. It's a question of how do we use it. So I would like to draw people's attention to how China is now harnessing artificial intelligence with their new, what they call, social credit system, which effectively assigns an Uber score to every individual based on their behavior.
Yeah.
And because AI now permits the gathering of data, not just about transactions, which is what we always talk about, AI and finance, every transaction can be tracked and recorded. No, it also will capture every action, because the clothes you wear have RFID chips and are emitting signals, because every sensor is capturing. Your phone has a signature that's revealing all your actions. But also, it will reveal all your reactions, because when you go to the movies, it's not that you're watching the movies are now watching you and capturing your emotional reaction and selling the data about how human beings react to this film. When you start to triangulate this, you can come up with a system, as China is pursuing now, where if I borrow my mom's car because she has a disabled parking permit because I just want to drop the package off, the system is going to clock that I did this and immediately my eligibility for government job just went to 0, and my mortgage rate potentially just went through the roof. So that's one way to use artificial intelligence. Totally different ways as well. And I think we need to really think about it, because it will shape the future of our societies, our democracies, our body politic.
Really interesting the way this is all done. And of course, from an investment point of view, when you're looking at how you tickle the tentacles of the future, and you've got to look at what's going to be a valid investment or valid risk mitigation or the way that you do it. Mike DeAddio, you're the Chief Operating Officer of WorldQuant, overseeing all of technology and finance. And how do you speed up predictive analysis of the investment profile, particularly when you're evaluating, you've got 15 offices around the world, you've got a big global responsibility for all of the money that's in your oversight system. Give us some kind of idea of what you're using in terms of AI to help you with better investment overview and better investment analysis.
Sure. So thank you very much. And I want to touch on what Mike said earlier, which is there are the broad applications of AI, and actually PIP as well, and then there are narrow ones. And now we have been working with AI, machine learning for investment use and trading for a very long time. It's been with us for a decade or more. So
your founder is really one of the founders of that whole business.
That's right. That's right. Machine learning, it's been Igor's view and vision for a very long time. So we've gotten to 10 million trading signals, which sounds crazy, but it continues to grow.
Wow.
And if you just do the math, 10 years in business, 300 researchers today, but average less, the math doesn't work without the machines. The machines don't tire. They don't ask for time off. They don't get groggy in the morning. They just keep going. But it's man plus machine. Okay, that's the way we look at it. I'll give you a little story. I've read in the prep for this. There's the robot apocalypse that's coming, right? When the apocalypse comes, it's actually quite interesting. We have a project called Robotopia, okay, which is the opposite of that. And it was an idea that actually our founder came up with about a year ago, and initially everyone was worried about it. The researchers, like, is this going to put me out of a job? What is it? Well, it's actually interesting when you drill down into it and you talk to a researcher, and this is just not for our researchers, but it's for anybody doing data science or data analytics. Where does it start? It starts with the data. What's the data? In your case, it's the data that the drones are taking, the values and the platform of what you do with it. So if you talk to one of our researchers, they start with the data. It's almost like data dating your data, right? You have to start, you have to read the profile of the data. What is it? How does it fit with you and your research style? What do you do with it from there? It might end in taking your data out to dinner, maybe. Who knows? And then if you look at that, there's this long process before you start to do the creative stuff, the really interesting stuff, that you then turn over to the machines to go find the signals. And that whole process, if you look at it, it's important, but it's not what humans are best at. Getting the data ready for analysis. So this Robotopia project has turned into really automating that part of what humans can do, but aren't the best at, and then leaving the humans, or really bright researchers from around the world, to think about the algorithms and what we should have the machines looking for. And that, essentially, man plus machine, makes our researchers, and they're a finite number. We have 300, but it's only 300. If we can make them 10 times more valuable and 10 times more efficient, our business gets better. We find more signals. We do better for our investors. We do better as a business. And that way, and in that manner, it's man plus machine, and it's really pushing humans to what they do best, which is the creative side of it, for now at least, until we had broad AI.
Intuition and
creativity. And the last piece, I think, is that the story's important. And I saw a play the other night with Igor and Mike, actually, called Ink, which is a story about...
You talk about Igor Tuchinski, the founder of WorldQuant. Where's Igor? Is he in the audience? Put your hand up, Igor. Let people see who you are. Great creator.
Yeah, so we saw this play about the sun, Rupert Murdoch, Larry Lamb, which was a fantastic play. I highly recommend it. And there's this one scene that sticks in my memory. It says, people must have a story. People must know the story.
Right.
And if you don't have a story, they'll make one up. So until you have this chief storyteller who can say what it's doing or why this Robotopia is good for you as a researcher, for example, people will fear it.
So here's a question. One of the things that you do within WorldQuant is automated data destruction.
Automated data destruction?
Because there are times when you've got to actually excise some of the data, and you've got machinery internally within the company that looks at when information no longer becomes relevant to your current investment analytical decisions, correct?
So I would call it less data destruction and then more signal rotation.
Signal rotation.
There are times when certain things don't work,
Right.
and you need to exit them from the portfolio and wait until they work again. And when you have 10 million signals, 800 data sets, and ungodly amounts of data, no human being can do that on a timely basis.
Right.
So the system needs to do that. The system needs to understand that. It needs to work on its own so it can handle the massive amount of scalability that you need in this world.
Right.
And that scalability is just growing. I mean, exponential data, you cannot do this for a human. And that's where you have to trust the machines, and the man plus machine is what equals the better outcome.
So Dominic, you've been with Jefferies since 2010, and something interesting has come up, particularly this year, 2017, as a year for and in the business of hedge funds. Many hedge funds have more tech than most, yet poor performance has been a hedge fund hallmark in 2017. So give us some kind of idea with the work that you do and the technologies you harness, how this might help enhance not necessarily the hedge fund business, but your accuracy of investment decision-making and risk mitigation in the modern world.
So, I mean, I'm nowhere near as smart as many of the people in this room, but I'm in the business of giving advice to clients, mostly corporate clients. At one point, Mike was a client as well. Didn't take my advice, didn't need it.
Hey, still a client, oh, good for you.
But in giving advice, I mean, so I remember back in 2002, when I was a telecom banker and the industry collapsed, I got very depressed. And at the time, my boss was a guy called Ken Moelis, who's been a very successful investment banker. And he came to me and he said, don't worry about being disintermediated by technology. Don't worry, the investment banking business, the advice-giving business is not going away. You know, only human beings can give advice at the end of the day. And it goes back to this notion of whether automation is going to take away the notion of judgment. So a little bit, one of the quotes that I remember reading, I think in the autobiography, or the biography of Steve Jobs, was that, you know, at the end of the day, you can have the best violinists, you can have the best pianists and trumpet players or whatnot, but you still need a conductor that's going to harness all of that capability and create the concert. You still need the film director to make the movie. So I think there's you can have a lot of information, but ultimately you need the human judgment to give advice. In the investment banking business today, the highest paid advisors are almost one-man shows. They actually don't have any people working for them anymore, but they get paid a lot of money to give advice because they know how to bring people together. They understand the human element. The lead advisor to Mike, when he sold his business, was not the biggest investment bank. It was a boutique investment bank because the individual who advised him knew when the moment was right to contact the buyer to make the transaction happen. So I don't believe that that AI per se will take over the judgment of human beings in making things happen, because a lot of things that need to happen are about people. It's about harnessing the technology and creating something out of it. It's the creative process, the individual process. And increasingly, I think over time, what AI will do is it will actually give individuals more and more power to express their individuality, whether it's in manufacturing a bespoke suit or painting. You don't necessarily need a lot of technology to do that, but you can actually use that technology to sell what you do well. So we had a discussion this morning about the impact on jobs from AI, and at least my view is that what we're seeing is the whole nation of employment change, because people can actually effectively employ themselves and get paid on a peer-to-peer basis for what they do well by harnessing technology and AI. And finally, what I'd say on the trading side, because I'm not a trader, but certainly if anyone can tell me here that they believe that any form of AI could have predicted the price of Bitcoin, I don't think there's any form of intelligence that could have done that.
Exactly. Who here in the audience would have thought $11,000 for Bitcoin? Come on, be honest about it. Nobody. You're all professionals in the finance business.
I mean, so ultimately, what is Bitcoin? If you look at it, the price of Bitcoin, there's so many different variables you can think that go into it. Whether it's individuals liking the notion of an unregulated currency, whether it's pure speculative behavior, which is probably what it is, today, and none of that can be predicted per se, but I think most human beings can understand intuitively why Bitcoin is where it is for reasons that have nothing to do much more than human nature at this stage. So, so at the end of the day, I believe that, technology, AI will automate things that require maybe a lot of time and a lot of people to do much more quickly and more efficiently and more precisely. But at the end of the day, all of that technology can be harnessed by individuals to allow the individuals to do more with their brain and to tap into parts of the brain that maybe are untapped and underutilized.
So you speak French, German, Spanish, and Italian. We're now living in a multicultural, globalized kind of environment. Do you find that there are specific elements you have to be aware of in different jurisdictions because of cultural differences, language differences, or do you find that the AI disciplines are really the same in a multicultural environment?
So I think that the cultural differences are becoming almost more accentuated as people seek to create more individuality based on what I said before. So, I mean, I just happen to speak those languages because I grew up in many different places and I picked them up when I was young, and it's easy for young children to learn languages, much more difficult for adults to do that. So I haven't been able to learn a single new language since I was 6 or 7 years old. So most of those languages were learned early on. But I do think that, I think we're moving toward, I think technology and the availability of information is giving people the desire to become more free, and I think part of that is also defining themselves more by their culture. So there is obviously a reaction against multiculturalism, but I think a lot of it has to do with individuals feeling that they can get the information. I mean, it's probably a mistake in many cases that most people believe that it's good enough to read Wikipedia to get all their information or other sources of information. But that also says that, at the end of the day, those people that can take that information and judge what's real and what's not real, what's reliable, what's not reliable, those are going to be human beings.
Right.
But I haven't really answered your question, but I do think that cultural differences are things that are difficult for machines to understand, and it's a human, and you have to have the experience and you have to have grown up in the environment to understand how different cultures think.
Precisely right. It's just interesting with Jefferies, their chief executive, Rich Handler, is the longest serving executive on Wall Street. Long time. He's been in the role for many, many years, but where there's such a lot of churn, particularly at a high level on Wall Street, they're still doing it. And so all of this leads us to somebody who really specializes in the business of human performance. When Elon Musk made the comment some couple of months ago about the fact that employment is going to change radically because of AI and people are going to be losing their jobs, I can only think back to the motor industry when robots first started to be deployed in Japan and then starting slowly in Detroit. But Andy Walsh, you've specialized for the last 20 years in looking at the development of human performance. So if you look at, is this a conflict between man versus machine, or is it really a challenge for companies and for investment professionals to be able to determine how you enhance human performance? So when we showed that clip at the beginning of this session, you actually helped coach not just those particular flyers who then bounced their way back into the airplane, but also you helped coach Felix Baumgartner. How many of you here in the audience know who Felix Baumgartner is? Few of you. Well, he's the only man in history to jump from a balloon at 127,000 feet and make a successful landing to Earth. But Andy, this is what you work with. So tell us what you do and tell us why you believe in people with machines rather than people v machines.
Oh, great question. And that was my previous career, so just to be clear with everybody. But human factors is my world. And I think it's been brought up over and over again here today, but the fundamental question on our table right now is, what makes us uniquely human? If we're going to work in the field of human optimization, more and more we're asking ourselves, what are humans really good at? What are we fundamentally really good at? Because as the machine starts to come into the conversation, we see more and more the things a few years ago we thought that a machine couldn't do, they now can do. But if we go back in our career, and especially my career, we've studied elite performers across all sorts of disciplines. And what really isolates or becomes apparent when you look at high-performing individuals, teams, organizations, is those characteristics that do make us human. Compassion, empathy, creativity, courage, values such as that. Those are the default mechanisms of the top performers we have. So we see this as a staggering opportunity right now. For the first time in history, we have a set of sensors and technologies that allow us to look at a human in an unparalleled fashion. We also have, thanks to AI, the capacity to now understand the human. And don't forget, the human is the most complex entity in the planet, and the brain is still one of the most powerful computers in the planet. So what does that provide us with? Well, that provides us, in our business, with this idea of how do we augment the human? Now, augmenting them towards those higher human characteristics is ultimately where we're headed. But this is, as I said, the first time in history, we're at the dawn of sort of the evolution of evolution, as we put it.
Yeah.
We can manipulate an individual, we can train an individual, and I think in the world as we grow, and if I'm wrong, I'm out of a job, but as we grow with respect to AI coming into the equation and taking over a lot of our conversations, what is those pieces of human characteristics and behavior that we can now augment, and even more, tap into unparalleled and unforeseen skills and awareness that we have that could potentially be brought to a higher level of order. And one particular case example, who's familiar with the gut biome? The gut is a second brain. You've seen the technology around the afferent sensing system in the human gut, which this idea is starting to accelerate as the understanding comes forward. There's a series of science around the back end that shows that you know that gut feeling when you know something's wrong. Yeah. In that world of what we saw early on, those individuals doing those high-risk, highly complex environments, they speak about the days when things go wrong. There was a sense. We're now starting to understand that this sensing comes from, in part, this afferent system in the gut, which was potentially developed over thousands of years. What if we start to take these skills and senses that have potentially lain benign within us for many years and use this opportunity? The machine can take all the busy work, and we can explore our creativity, our compassion, our empathy, and use those tools to help augment that, and that's the space that we're playing in.
So, Andy, you train teams and individuals in sport, culture, the military, certainly high-performing teams in the military, and in business settings, basically to optimize human performance. Explain to us this one technique that you use to construct what you call constructive adversity. What is constructive adversity, and why do you use that as a tool to enhance the performance of the human element?
In our world, with elite performers, and that's where we spend most of our time because that's what we're trying to understand. As I said earlier, we see sort of the skill sets, the technical skill sets we don't deal with. We deal with more of the human in the equation, those values and character traits that essentially manifest themselves at that level. Basically, it's an old idea, it's nothing new, but when you apply a lot of stress to an individual in a highly complex and varied environment, what do you default to? You'll default to your training and those values and characteristics that make up that training. So in order for us to understand how to help an individual and then a team or an organization, putting you in environments and challenges where we strip away what's unnecessary, whether it's through stress or pressure or whatever it may be, we start to see who really shows up, not the person you think you want to be when it's tough, but the person who you really are, and then giving you opportunities to train against that state from that grounding position. And it fundamentally comes back to the question, who are you? What do you stand for? And sometimes that gets caught up in all the noise and all the busyness of our world, and getting back to that fundamental question that allows us to build up within that context. And we use lots of different varieties of training, and then the technology is now there to help us be more accurate. As a trainer, our fundamental role is to provide a safe environment for an individual to allow them to explore their edge. Now, safe doesn't mean it's not challenging, it just means when all comes to bear, we've got your back. And some of the concepts we're looking at right now are sort of like the idea of a digital twin, a representation of you in the digital environment that allows us to understand how you're feeling today. And for case in point, if we put that in the boardroom, for example, or in the training environment, we put a little pressure on you, we start to see where people are with respect to that scaling. And then when they get just to that point where things are getting a little bit tough, we're aware of it through the technology. Then we can deliver an appropriate input or appropriate challenge to them. And that idea is now starting to be realized for the first time, again, thanks to AI and the back end.
So when you were working with Felix Baumgartner for his big jump, you basically were giving him training as to how to deal with adversity in something that was unparalleled. I mean, here's a guy jumping out of a balloon. 127,000 feet, that requires quite a lot of kahunas.
Absolutely, absolutely. So again, I think it was brought up earlier on that you can't prepare for some of these dynamic and chaotic environments that our people in. And even if we plan for the event to go this way, 9 times out of 10 it goes some other direction. So the idea is developing those skills and characteristics such that no matter which way it goes, you are then in a position to respond versus
But you
react.
trained him.
Yeah, we put in a lot of training, and we do the physical side of it, and there's lots of sophistication around genetics and data assessment and things that are in terms of improving the physical side. But then it's the human side, that's that character value, and the fundamental question that he ultimately came to was, what does he want to stand for? How does he want to be remembered in that particular case? And that was the starting point of his transition in terms of preparing himself mentally for that achievement. And ultimately, those are the balances that we're looking for. How to get someone, obviously physically, technically prepared, but that's actually the more of the easy part. Then how do we get them to sort of think about themselves and their role in the world and their role to them and who they really want to be?
Right.
And that's where technology is giving us some opportunities now, which are going to be powerful, very powerful.
So, Mike Lynch, here's a question for you. Your company, Luminent, which basically specialized in looking at M&A transactions and basically doing the analysis around that, and having heard from all of our participants in this particular session about, A, the importance of AI, but secondly, the greater importance of human analysis, notwithstanding pattern recognition analysis and so forth. But you operate Luminent in 15 countries. It's basically a route for the legal profession and the automation of due diligence in M&A transactions. Give us some sense as to what kind of anomalies you can pick up when you're looking at M&A, aside from just dodgy documents. Just give us some sense.
The goal of the technology is exactly as we've all been discussing, which is to get to the point where the skilled human is freed up to do the bits that matter. So what it will do is it will read through, potentially 1 million contracts. It will spot the ones where there are issues that would affect the negotiation and the deal, and it will bring those up to the person who then may sit in a room and do the negotiation. Now, in that high-value situation, that's going to be supplementing a human. In a low-value situation, the computer may actually go on and do the negotiation. So, it's almost unheard of, unless there's an issue to do with speed or a hostile environment, that AI is not about augmenting a human. And, people often assume that the human's going to disappear, but it's actually a much more difficult problem. Talk about driverless vehicles. Have you ever been along that wonderful road on the Amalfi Coast in Italy, Yeah. And what happens is, of course, 2 Italian buses meet. And at that point, the laws of physics do not allow them to pass, but it's the only road on the coast. And then there's an amazing process that happens that involves medieval insults and all sorts of things in Italian. And somehow the laws of physics are bent, and these 2 buses get past each other. Now, the important thing to understand about that, if you had a driverless bus, basically they're both going to stop, and then the whole of that road will lock up. And that's an example of what we call exception processing. And actually, the issue in many of these areas is not the task, it's the exception processing. And so what you're continually doing is looking for ways in which you can get the human to function doing the bits that they add. Now, one of the things I'd be very careful about, though, in this area is that lots of people think they know how they make decisions. And actually, if you drive around a country road in a car and you take a curve, you can do experiments that show that you actually balance about 60 or 70 variables every time you decide what speed to go around that curve. But of course, if I asked you why you went around that, you'd say, well, the road conditions were good, and I wasn't late. And what you do is you back rationalize a decision, but the decisions you make are actually probabilistic and multivariant. And the reason why these new AIs are so powerful is that that's how they work. But the problem is all of the commentators talk about them as though they are with this way in which we communicate very simple decisions. But if you use those approaches of 3 or 4 variables, and then you actually test them, you would perform poorly. You'd be an appalling driver if you actually drove the way you say that you made the decisions. And there's some beautiful experiments that show this. Now, the reason this is important is it informs a lot of the errors that are going on about policy in AI and in terms of investments in AI. So a very simple one is we believe that a decision is better if it's explainable. So if you were doing a proper analysis, you should be able to explain to me that I took in A in the light of B, and I did C. Actually, it's very easy to prove beyond debate that if you add explainability as a constraint, your result will be less accurate. And that's totally counterintuitive to how we work. But that's because actually the way in which we say we make decisions is so different from how we do it. And a very famous colleague of mine at Royal Society talks about the fact we have to embrace uncertainty. We have to understand that actually we make our decisions by weighing probabilities and uncertainties. And the reason this is important is if you look at, for example, policymakers in AI, we now have an explainability concept in the GDPR European rules. Well, actually, that's a statement of saying how many more people do we want to die in autonomous vehicle crashes so that we know why they died. And because of that counterintuitive nature, I think the other thing is you have to be very careful about human words like creativity. You know, an AI at the moment will write just as good advert music as human composers. Now, it won't write Beethoven, but nor do most human composers.
Right.
And so it's a question of, you know, horses for courses, and is that being creative or not? So there is definitely something humans do that these AIs can't do. It's something to do with broadness, it's something to do with inference, it's something to do with planning. But it's not as simple as these cliches about how we like to think we do things. And it's a real dangerous trap to start to do that sort of anthropomorphization of the machines. And you know, the other thing is to think about what do we want the AIs to do? Well, you know, we generally want them to help a human, unless the human can't be present for some reason. But, you know, I spend my life researching how to stop AIs jumping off of heights, not how to train them to do it, because actually they're at that level. We're worried about them accidentally jumping off something, not getting to do it. And a lot of the functions that we're talking about here are very mundane. Now, when this subject broke, I advise number 10 in science and technology. And
you're a scientific advisor too,
That's right. And before, you know, it was sort of mainstream news, they realized that this was coming, and we looked around for the effect on jobs, and we got a number of 3 in 10 jobs will be affected. And then, you know, almost every week, the number of these estimates from various bodies has been increasing, and they vary wildly. But probably...
That's all speculative guesswork, isn't it?
Well, I think it's called management consultancy, but you can call it that if you want to. But anyway, they're very wildly, but probably 3 in 10 is the number. Now, I think it's absolutely valid to say that that doesn't mean 3 in 10 jobs are disappearing. You know, we would never have predicted all of the IT consultants we now have in the late 60s. But it does mean that there's going to be a massive upheaval in terms of skills and adaptation of the workforce.
That's a positive sign, isn't it?
Well, it's not, because we're not prepared for it. So is our education system ready to actually, in effect, retrain and point in different directions 3 out of 10 of our workforce? And what happens to the people during that transition? So, you know, the debate about man versus machine, no, that's over. It's always man and machine.
Right.
But the issue is the disruption that we're going to see and how we handle that as a society.
So, Pippa, a question for you. I mean, Amazon introduced drone deliveries 4 years ago, and particularly with your background advising the White House and basically the work that you do advising the generals at Sandhurst here in the UK and the military machinery and so forth, you watching all of the trends of what's happening and seeing this human-machine interface, give us some sense of what's coming and how you can advise all of us fellow professionals in the room as to what we should be making some kind of note of for what's coming next.
Well, one of the other things I'm doing now is advising the British government on Brexit, but particularly the new trade deals. And that gives me a chance to look at the British economy carefully. And one of the great things is this country is very strong in AI. And this is a great thing. So I'm watching this area. I'll tell you the things I see coming that intrigue me and we should all be thinking about. And one is taking this idea of the human AI interface even further as we get into ingesting robots, that you literally swallow one and it will not only monitor your health, but conduct surgeries on you from the inside.
Yes, there's a company, a British company in Silicon Valley called, well, they specialize in insidables, something that's inside you.
Yes. I think what Elon Musk is doing with Neuralink, where the idea is to implant electrodes directly into the brain, which eliminates your need to use a mobile phone or any other screen-based device so you can communicate directly with the net, which I also find sort of challenging because I don't always have one view about things. Like, oh, I like that. No, maybe not. Well, it could be. You know, how does that convey in a world where it's coming directly from your head? I think another aspect of this, too, is entering a world where potentially we have different categories of human beings. We have those who are enhanced, and they have brain prosthetics, and their capacity to think and to reason is very different from someone who doesn't have that prosthetic. We already have devices that you wear around the back of your neck, almost exactly like this speaker that we're wearing, that stimulate the brain, and where human beings normally can only do repetitive tasks without some kind of failure for something like 7 to 14 minutes, suddenly they can do it for 4 hours. You know, it's a dramatic change in performance. I was very interested in your work and how you feel about how do we manage a world where we're going to go beyond drugs that enhance performance. We're going into AI that enhances performance. And so the line between what is human and what is not is definitely changing rapidly. And, you know, we're of the generation, everybody in this room watching this is most probably going to have access to that famous 100-year life as we have all our parts replaced, you know, the hip goes, they just put in a new one. And, you know, suddenly it's on every level. It will affect what does it mean to be human.
That's right. The goal is to live to be 1,260 months.
Okay.
Come on, all of you with numerical efficiency understand what that means. To live to be 105, it's certainly within the realm of people that are born in this particular era. Mike and Dominic, you hearing all of this and looking at the way that you basically oversee investment supervision and analysis and looking at performance and so forth, what's your view on what you hear from Mike and from Andy and from Pippa? Any comments?
So I'll start. First, I want to say I've been in that situation with the 2 buses on that road there. And thinking about it now, having AI being driverless buses really scares me. So maybe I'm not ready for that yet. That is a scary thought. But I would say I want to pick up a little bit on this man plus machine is what we have been talking about here. But there is a transition. We had a breakfast this morning that was sponsored by McKinsey, and we were talking about this transition. And, you know, I sort of personally think about it as it goes into buckets. I look at the world, we have digital natives, and those are mostly our children at this point. We have digital immigrants, that's probably most of us here. Those of us who started with technology and data earlier are probably easier to speak the language. And then we have digital, I used the word dinosaur this morning, it didn't go over that well. Maybe we call them digital foreigners. And that's where this transition is the hardest, because it's the least natural. It's somewhat generational, although I think it's socioeconomic as well. And so when we look at it in our world, what we do, we try to extend opportunity out as much as we can, both with our web platforms for allowing people anywhere in the world to contribute trading signals, because there's an economic gain for that. We have somebody who happens to do that who's a farmer in China. And we would have never found that in the regular way. So you push out opportunity for those who can take it, for those who are either digital natives or digital immigrants. But those who are a bit left behind, I think that's where society, politics, policy, and also the private sector have a long way to go. And it's not going to be top down. It's not going to be governments doing retraining. We hear this all the time, retraining. Well, there's a human aspect to this. There's the psychological aspect of people having value in their careers. Their careers are gone. Retraining is not the first step. It's the human psychology that's the first step. And
developing a new narrative for their professional life.
Right, and how do you get them to be ready for it versus just say, go retrain, because that's not going to work. Right. So I think, you know, we do it in a very small, narrow sense where we try to push opportunity out there. I think there's a much bigger macro sense that education, private education, will have to step into the breach, because I don't think governments or policymakers can possibly do it at the speed at which it's going now.
Dominic,
So I think we live in an era where there's a lot of people have a great sense of entitlement, maybe because life has been too easy for more people, a lot of people.
A very small top of the pyramid.
Well, there's a general sense of entitlement that there are all these problems. What are we going to do about it? Someone's going to solve the problem for us, whether it's education, whether it's regulation, whether it's the government, whether it's whatever.
Right.
But actually, we live in a world where it's easier than ever for people to take control of their own lives. And so, at least in our business, in the investment banking business, we try to tell our people that stop working on a mundane task because someone else can do that work. But use the people that can do that work, or the technology that work to add more value. And it's easier and easier for young people to move up, for their voice to be heard. But they've got to embrace technology, and so everyone can embrace technology. My mother's 77 years old. She's never been technologically savvy, and yet her life has been enhanced dramatically by smartphones and digital communications, in maintaining relationships with her friends, having, the cost of travel has gone down. She can go on holiday more cheaply, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of things that have made our life better, and I think for employees, the more they embrace technology, the more they'll be able to focus on the value add, and so I don't see that there's a huge threat to individuals as long as they take control of their own lives and they basically focus on figuring out what they're actually good at, what they actually enjoy doing, and then try to figure out, based on what's out there, how they basically harness their great potential. But there's too much of a rhetoric around everyone else solving individuals' problems, when individuals should be able to solve their own problems.
So what kind of questions, companies that you're guiding and advising, large transactions and so forth, what kind of questions come up, if you can think of any examples of what you might be able to provide to these clients that you represent?
Well, I mean, again, the question, I mean, we spend most of our time advising companies on when to raise money, how to raise money, or sell themselves. And they need, while they have a lot of information at their fingertips, and many companies have their own mergers and acquisitions departments of people who do a lot of work, ultimately they need someone to give them, they need to feel comfortable that there's someone who they can trust to tell them when to act, to give them advice as to whether the price that they're getting on a transaction is fair. Is it reasonable? How do we present that deal to the public and get them to understand that it's a good transaction? What's your view in terms of how we deal with the regulators, et cetera, et cetera? So, we constantly, despite all of the information that's out there, ultimately, CEOs of companies, founders of companies, there's very few people more intelligent, if any, than Mike on my right here, but ultimately he still needed an advisor to tell him when to sell his company, what the right price was. Maybe he didn't, but he certainly paid an advisor a lot of money to do that.
I thought you said lunch with.
You didn't take your advice.
Exactly. So I do think that technology is actually enabling for individuals. They just have to take responsibility for harnessing that technology to achieve their own goals.
So Andy, hearing all of this and thinking of your work in trying to raise the human condition, the human decision-making, qualitative thrust and so forth, what's your take on all of this? I mean, obviously finance companies, all of these professional investment experts are keen to hear about how to maximize intuition, human performance, so that decision-making becomes more effective. Any thoughts you have, particularly in relation, for example, to human potential, and not just about that the education composite is stagnant, but they're just new forms of education. What would you guide the professionals in the room here as to what they should be aware of?
I think when we think about this, we break the human into, in the development of a human, into a couple of categories, and this may help. The human optimization side is where we say, take the current system as it is, the human, and what can we do in that space? And I don't have time today, but the reality is there's still staggering potential left before we get into augmentation and things. And I think Most organizations I've worked with spend an inordinate amount of time executing, the classic analogy, very, very little time preparing their talent. And I think with respect to intuition and compassion, empathy, these things that we've talked about, there's still a lot of opportunity there. That being said, as we flip into what we call from optimization to augmentation, the wearables, the injectables, the implants, this is going to create a very different type of human, to be very blunt, at how we look at it. And especially when we get to the worlds of where the morality of certain communities isn't quite aligned with where a lot of the Western world sits and Eastern worlds, depending on your bias. But the reality is that there's a opportunity there to do things at an order of magnitude, probably, with technology on the human, which I can't predict what that'll look like. But I am a little concerned on two levels. Firstly, we don't really know what we're still good at and how we're good at it, and we don't really understand the human condition well. So we're augmenting something from a basis of lack of knowledge. So what are we creating in that case? And what you brought up, Pippa, I think is very important. There's an opportunity there for the haves to be able to do this, and the have-nots who won't have access to some of this technology. And I think this is going to layer into potentially another divide in structure, class structure, if you like, with respect to if you can afford the A1 implant, and that gives you 100% more improved memory, but the other person can only afford the D5 implant, and that gives you a 5% improvement in memory. What's that going to do? And I think this is becoming, in the world of security especially, there's a lot of conversations around if you took all the rules away and just stripped down and said, I want to make this kind of superhuman person or team, what could that potentially look like? And I think that is essentially a challenge for us because we still don't really understand us yet. So that's how we look at it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what we've tried to do today is just to give you an interesting kind of motorway ride through the Amalfi Drive of intelligence and intelligent thinking. So we'd like to say a very, very big thank you to Pippa. Pippa, thanks for showing us the drone. Give her a round of applause. Andy, for your very concise and really interesting comments, and lovely to see that you're involved with that video we showed. Mike, your comments very interesting. So great to hear the way that you spoke about the multicultural differences. And Mike, with you looking at the way that you developed, I find it so interesting, just in closing, Mike's dad was a fireman and his mom was a nurse. But it obviously was the case that your dad taught you how to put out fires, and that's what you've been doing professionally in this whole incredible career that you've had and developed and become successful.
Not to get a job that involved running into burning buildings. So, that's what I did.
So, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ralph Simon. Thank you so much for being at this session. This is an important part of the future of investment. Thank you, thank you, thank you.